Welcome to the Today Counts show. Today does count because it impacts, it influences your tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. The Today Counts podcast is sponsored by the generous donors of the Lead Today community. I'm your host, Kim Piper. I am authentically excited to welcome Gary Harpst on the show today. He is the founder and CEO of Lead First. He works with leaders. He works with organizations. You know, when I was looking at his LinkedIn profile, he hashtags phrases like this: business systems, servant leadership, faith-based business, leadership development. He's also the author of Built to Beat Chaos. He has a background in software. There's a lot of things that I want to uncover. Now, I will say this, for those of you who've been listening to the show, you know that I'm a Michigan Wolverine. Gary is Ohio State Buckeye, but we're both men of faith. So we just have to work through that and keep the main thing, And I just keep on finding more and more really good people, but they're Ohio State fans, and I don't know what that's all about. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. I'm laughing because one of the things my people ask me the most about is the partnership I've had for almost 40 plus years with two other guys. And they say, what is it that keeps you guys together? Most business partnerships don't last. And I say, well, there's something more important in the business, which is our faith. And so that's what holds us together here, even though we went through a brutal end of the year season for Ohio State.
Yeah. Okay.
Thankfully, we believe in a God who's bigger than that.
Yeah. I don't want to gloat in it. I'm just so relieved. You have to remember all the years that we've suffered. And of course, the Lions have made the playoffs. And of course, our family is walking on clouds right now.
We're enjoy it because it doesn't always last.
Yeah, it's true. We're just praying that we can at least win that first round against the Rams and Matt Stafford. But Gary, tell a little bit about your story. Before I hit the record button, you said something that was really cool. I thought you said that you've never had a job in your life. Maybe that's a great way to start. But tell your story of how you've come up with that phrase and what does that actually mean.
Well, I did grow up in a farm, a small farm, and that era is pretty much past. But you learn to really enjoy work as a farm kid, and it becomes part of your identity. Even at 10 years old, you're out there driving a tractor or doing stuff that today OSHA would freak out over. But so my life journey is just one of really liking to solve problems. I got 2 degrees in sort of design and information technology. And then I started a business with 2 other fellows when I was 29 years old. And the idea for that business came out of a Bible study. It was called Solomon Software, and it was very successful. And we ultimately sold that to a larger competitor and rolled that into a business that was sold to Microsoft. And then more recently, I felt like instead of winding down, God has been winding me up on a brand new journey, which is Lead First, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more.
Great. Now, when you work with clients, how does that even happen? How are you introduced? How is your company introduced to clients' needs? What is there a primary focus? How would you describe Lead First? What does Lead First offer to your community?
Lead First is, it helps to understand my history just a little bit. We spent our first business many, many years ago, 50,000 clients, was always focused on technology and solving business problems. So we built up this huge expertise on just management systems and how the technology can support that. Well, in the last couple of years, I felt like God was really saying to me that we need to help business leaders owners in particular, who have a faith, but they're growing or trying to run a business that's growing and changing rapidly, which has its own set of dynamics. And they would like to also integrate their faith into that business. And so we spent the last year and a half, almost 2 years, retooling all of our platform technology from a prior business, and then overlaying it with best practices on kingdom building and faith in business. So that's the Lead First platform, which is just now being introduced. And what makes it different is today, most of the time, either you can pick a business platform that has no faith aspects to it, it's agnostic, or you can go get some leadership training or belong to a prayer group or a mentoring group, which is very, very valuable, but it doesn't really help you run the business. And so what we're doing is trying to put both of those things together in the same platform.
That is really exciting, and there's other men and women who work in the marketplace, with a faith-based perspective, a biblical worldview, a Christian worldview, whatnot. But this I've never have really heard before. So you're saying that you actually have, or you're developing management systems that probably have language. Is that what you're saying? A language that kind of helps with the decision-making process. Maybe even what does it do? Does it put context to metrics? So what talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're putting your finger on the sort of the complexity to describe this. Let me give you one statistic before I go further. So, almost 85% of the people in an organization are the primary interface they have with that organization is with their direct frontline supervisor. And we think so much, when you hear the term leadership training, it immediately jumps to executive retreats and things at the top layer. Our heart is to build the kind of technology, not technology, but the kind of processes and education that equips the frontline supervisor to have really good relationships with their people and treat them like human beings, as God would have us treat them. And so the only way you can make the frontline layer work effectively is the top has to know where they're going, which gets you into strategy and purpose, and the middle layer has to look up and down. And so we deal with all that complexity, and it's frankly, it's not easy because there's so many dynamics in trying to make that frontline supervisor layer effective. They tend to be new in their job, frontline supervisors, and they tend to have been educated in some area of production, and now they're in a supervisory role. So interestingly, the research shows that the number one engagement factor and satisfaction of an employee has to do with the relationship with their direct supervisor.
Yeah, absolutely. And the scary part is, how often do you run into a hard worker, somebody that has produced and then they're promoted, but they don't know really what that looks like, so they kind of just keep doing what they were doing, and not providing that management layer or that leadership layer, and that creates misery for everybody. We run into that all the time, right? I mean, that's how do we prepare people for that? But it sounds to me like this process that you're speaking of. I mean, language is a very important part of creating culture, and when we're using processes and softwares that undergird that, or what's the word I'm looking for, infuse that, support that. That sounds. Can you give an example of? Yes. Yeah. Give me an example of what that even looks like.
This is a fresh example that just happened. People, you lead with a business issue. You have to do your job, but then you try to make a connection with that business issue to a biblical principle that helps you address it. So here's one that comes up all the time. You're in a meeting and with your small team and talking back and forth, and one person says, well, that was a stupid idea, or something that conveys more, it leads to a personal attack on someone else. And as a leader, what is your mindset? Do you permit that sort of thing to go on? Do you come down hard on the person who said it? How do you create a culture where people can talk to each other and keep in mind the bigger picture? Well, the biblical principle behind this is overcome evil with good. And so we try to teach leaders to take this idea of overcoming evil with good. Well, what's the definition of evil? In Scripture, we think of it as a church word. All evil means in the Greek and the Hebrew is sort of like rust on good metal or a deterioration of a piece of fruit. It just means the purpose is being eroded. And so if we can get in the head of that frontline supervisor and say, look, your job, your purpose is to make this team highly productive, then when there's unproductive conversation taking place, don't escalate it by you doing something inflammatory. De-escalate it and remember that the purpose is this teamwork. So that's sort of this blend. We do have technology that says, how do you set goals and those sort of things? But that's not where the challenge is. The challenge is getting in the head of the leader to think differently about what their job is. And then they don't overreact and take people off purpose.
I already like where this is going. A lot of our listeners are business leaders. They are people of faith. There's a big but that I'm going to throw at the end of that. But integrating their faith with their work is a challenge for them. And when I first start working with someone, it usually takes a little bit to kind of remove the layers in the relationship. And I often find that there's more faith in the marketplace than one might realize.
Totally.
But practicing their faith versus compartmentalizing their work from their faith is, there's a bridge there to be built. And I'm excited about the things we've seen at Lead today, where we are seeing men and women create that bridge. And then beyond the bridge, there is no need for the bridge because the chasm is gone, and the integration of their faith. I mean, one principle that I thought of right when you were talking, Gary, was, I'm going to butcher how it is, but in the book of Proverbs, it talks about when we hire carelessly, it's like an archer who shoots an arrow, into a crowd.
Without weighing, no
right.
aim.
Yeah. And, in other words, people die. People get hurt. Families get hurt when we are not diligent in our processes and what we do. The book of Romans, when Paul is speaking about leadership, there's a word that he uses to describe it. Only one: diligence. When it all comes down to it, it's just a lot of hard work. You really got to think about everything that you're doing, not just from a technical perspective, but from an interpersonal perspective, from a recognizing, from a biblical worldview, people are made in the image of God, and leading them. I also think about just how we use our words and short accounts, and that accountability is not a bad word. It's a good word. What usually makes it putrid or beautiful is the motive and the heart, that
behind it. Absolutely.
Yeah, behind it. Right.
Yeah.
Behind it.
That's very true. Yeah. Your point about, to me, there's sort of a mystery in leadership. I happen to love and believe deeply that God reveals himself through the creation he made.
Yes.
So it's not just the written word, and not just through the church and through the Bible itself. And one of the interesting things that came to my mind is I recently wrote a book, which I think you mentioned, I forget, but I'm convinced God had me write that book for me. He wanted me to go through this thought process.
This is built to chaos, built to beat chaos. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And one of the insights is see if you see the same profound connection I did. It took me a while. What got in the physical realm, when we build something like a mouse or this or that, we are able to build on the learning of prior generations, because the laws of physics are consistent. This mouse holds together because there's the laws of electromagnetism and all those sort of things, chemical laws, bonding, that make that thing work dependably every single time. But leaders are called to integrate not physical things, they're called to integrate humans. And human desire, human skill does not fit the law of physics. It doesn't obey the law of physics. So the essence of a leader's job is, number one, to determine purpose. What are we trying to do? That's your first requirement as a leader. And then number two, how do I create this organic chemistry to allow this team of people to pursue that purpose in a loving way? And God has created this universe so that the physical realm obeys the laws of physics. The human realm obeys the laws of love. I mean, he basically says all of Scripture is summed up in love your neighbor, love me, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the rules of chemistry. And so any leader who can't determine purpose and develop the skills to get people to treat each other right won't be successful. My personal opinion is God set the universe up this way because it makes us depend on him. We're dealing in this realm that's almost impossible. You said you deal a lot with conflict. It's mysterious what people think and want. They need help.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how, everybody knows this. When you really think about it, everybody knows it. And maybe that's why it's ignored. I don't know, because the principles are so powerful. I rewrote what you just said, just in my own words. The primary responsibility of leadership can be described in two principles. One is purpose. Why are we here? What are we about? What is about? You could just call it. What's the vision, mission, the values? But what I like about the word purpose, to me, there's a difference between purpose and mission, in my own opinion. And I try to promote this, but there's usually an ongoing, never-ending purpose if you do enough work. Like, for example, the purpose of my life, and I've done a lot of work on this. I could say it in different ways, and I started learning it when I was about 18 years old. It's a little league story, and I don't need to go into all that, but I learned that I am uniquely wired in this way. I absolutely love helping good people win. That's what I love doing. Now, I professionalize it. I say my purpose is shaping character. My purpose is inspiring faith. My purpose is shaping leadership. But if the listener pays attention to the first word I use in each of those last three phrases, they end with ing to describe never ending. Yeah, always going. My mission. I view missions often as seasonal, maybe, or even the life of a business could be reduced down to a mission. I liken it to our military. As I understand it, our military has a clear purpose. It has something to do with protecting our boundaries, undergirding our Constitution, something like that. And I guess you could stretch it out further, where some would say even spreading democracy. I don't know that that's its purpose. I don't think that's true. But if you think about its primary purpose, and then you pause for a minute, how many missions are we on? And that's literally what the military calls it, missions. And so to me, missions are very similar to chief aims or your big goals, the big rocks that you throw in there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. The terminology isn't as important to me as the concepts and the idea of where we're trying to get to. That ongoingness is one thing, and then the tactics or the projects or the missions or the specific steps you take to get there. And what's interesting about the idea of saying every leader has to define purposes, that isn't just at the top of the organization. It's at the frontline level. Okay, what's our department supposed to do, and what's our direction, our focus, So anyway, it's
Well, yeah, and then the second part, I just said, so then it brings us to a place where we say, how do we create a healthy culture which supports the people and the purpose? And that's what I heard you say.
Yeah, that's
What's the
right.
purpose? Why are we here? Second, now that we've got that established, how do I, as a leader, really own and propagate a healthy culture which supports both the people and the purpose?
You recapped in a way. You recapped really well what we're trying to do with Lead First, because there's sort of two dimensions. There's sort of I don't want to call it mechanical, but the idea of communicating and setting priorities and saying who's doing what feels a little more tangible. And there's more systems and process, and the bigger the organization gets, the more you need those mechanics of how to do things. I use the air traffic control example. You've got to have some framework for organizing this stuff. But then that other part, creating that environment of how do you get people to working together effectively, we're now into what you said. How do you care for people? And, you can't build openness. I mean, you can't work together unless you can talk to each other, and you can't talk to each other unless you trust each other, and you can't trust each other unless you care for each other. So there's relationships or chemistry, if you will, rules of chemistry that the Bible really gives great insight on.
I was in a doctorate program at Bethel up in St. Paul, many, many years ago, and Leith Anderson, the professor of record, he took us on these field trips. And one of the field trips we went on was very interesting and very much in line with kind of what you're talking about. I remember the name of the company. It was called Anderson's Trucking. There's a real quick story I'd like to tell that kind of fits into what we're talking about. Mr. Anderson, I don't remember his first name. I did get to meet him, start this business, or maybe his father did. It was definitely a family business, been around for a while, very, very successful. One of the largest in that region. And his brother was a pastor and was kind of in between jobs, if you will, in between churches. And while he was trying to rethink what he wanted to do, where he wanted to go, his brother, who ran Anderson Trucking, said, "Why don't you set up shop here? Because this big family called Anderson Trucking needs some spiritual, personal, support." And to the best of my knowledge, I mean, Gary, that was, I don't know, that was 20 something years ago. To the best of my knowledge, I believe he's still there. He never left. And the stories they tell about marriages healed, because when you think about trucking, that's a rough life. And the pressure it puts on marriages, on parenting, and faith then becomes more integrated. And the last time I checked on Anderson's Trucking, what they did is they not just kept him on staff, but they even kind of changed his purpose a little bit, or maybe I should say they didn't change his purpose, change his strategy. Where now throughout the organization, he's trying to teach leaders how to have these very helpful conversations that are human conversations.
Amen.
So they don't, right? So they just don't have to go to the chaplain, if you will, of the organization. But that kind of goes back to this altruistic idea of leadership. We're not just looking to drive results. We're looking to, one of the things that I believe is that if you identify a worthy goal in your life or in your business, and you're able to come to that goal through asking this question, I guess it's a statement and a question, but if nothing else gets done, and you could fill in the season, this year, this quarter, if nothing else gets done, this is what gets done. Now, once you put the work into that, it becomes so big that one of the questions you also have to ask is, and what kind of person am I going to have to become to see this goal accomplished? And then bigger than the person, what kind of people, what kind of culture are we going to have to become to accomplish that, right?
Yeah, I love
Because
that.
I think we kind of skip that sometimes.
Yeah.
I still think God gets it done, but if we're conscious about, oh gosh, if I haven't accomplished that in the past, there might be a reason for it. I haven't become the person who can lead us there, who can get there. And what is that all about? Oh my
I
goodness.
love that question. And I think it really relates. It's interesting how God teaches us. He brings us the same truth, but from different angles. And so that question focuses your mind, and actually it kind of leads into the, when I wrote the book about chaos, the reason I wrote it was we had a medical client, provider in Chicago that provides healthcare to the underserved. And when COVID hit, they were just so completely overwhelmed. I mean, 10 times the volume. The staff began to get sick, and it just the whole system turned into chaos. And your question, what I finally learned is that the way you attack chaos is with purpose. Chaos is not your enemy; it's the raw material, and purpose is what you do with that raw material. And so your question, what it does is it draws out purpose. It says if nothing else gets done, and it focuses you in on here's purpose, and then you can set aside the rest that overwhelms you. And I think it's one of the most profound things that set me free a little bit. I get up in the morning and I think, I got too much to do, and there's too much going on. And then I just drop back and say, wait a minute, what's my purpose? Today? What is my purpose? And then the rest kind of melts away. So
I think we all fall into that eventually, right? We get, and sometimes it just takes a little thing that gets us off rhythm, right? I mean, I think about this last 48 hours. I mean, I've been burning the candle at both ends. I've been on planes, flights are delayed. I'm working in a challenging environment. Got all this going on, and that can throw you off in your exercise. It can throw you off in your reading and your prayers and and just literally taking a step back, right? Just that opportunity to take steps. So I think it happens. I think it happens to all of us. But like you said, if you have worked hard on what your purpose is, it's a lifeline. It is. You got yourself in quicksand, but you got that rope and you're able to pull yourself out, and you go, gosh, I'm not going to ever get back here again, which you do, but less and less, right? The more you stay out of the quicksand, or I guess Stephen Covey would call that quadrant one.
That's that ongoing thing you were talking about, the ING,
Yes. Yeah. The ING, and
you keep renewing.
That's right. That's right. That's really good. But the pushback that you and I will get from our listeners is they're going to say, wait a second, are you telling me that you can come up with, just this narrow menu of this thing called a purpose? And what about all these other things? And I don't know what your answer is to that. Mine is, it's amazing what happens. I don't know how to explain it. I'd really like you to comment on this, but I don't know how to explain it. But when you're really chasing after a well thought out purpose, other stuff just gets done along the way. It's almost like, I don't know. How would you describe it?
I know the tension that you're talking about and other people bring up all the time, and I'm subject to it all the time as well. The way what I've learned about myself is there are things I have to know. I have to be bedrock truth, and then there are things I have to do. And then there's sort of the things I become, like the doing thing you just mentioned. If I do something long enough, if I know something and then I do something and I keep doing it, it becomes part of me. It becomes part of my being. It's like the master craftsman model, or how it becomes part of your fabric. And here's what I'm headed up to. The most profound truths in the Bible are bedrock framework for addressing the chaos in your life. So the very first words in the Bible are, in the beginning, God. And so right away, there's this bedrock truth of, do I believe this is a created place, that there's a God who's sovereign over it? Yes or no? Do I believe that or not? And then later on, Jesus says, or Paul says, without faith, it's impossible to please him. And I have to ask myself on a day when I've got 100 things that I think need to be done, and I've only got time for 10.
Yeah.
Those are the times where my belief system and my faith system overrides my chaos. And I sit there and say, now, wait a minute. There's time enough to do what God wants me to do today. Right? There is. And everything else is an illusion or a lie. And sometimes we can get so caught up in the worry about the 90% that we can't do, it keeps us from doing the 10%.
Man, that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, your book, Built to Beat Chaos, is that available on Amazon?
Yeah. That was published by Wiley. It's in all the major distribution, but Amazon, easy.
Yeah. The other thing that Purpose does, I mean, you're saying it. I mean, the title of your book is awesome, Built to Beat Chaos. But it did get me thinking, just on what you just said, that when you are chasing your purpose, it does reduce anxiety, because you're able to bring it down to what you just said. Okay, I've got 20 things that I'd like to do today. Maybe I need to take 15 minutes here, back up, and say, based upon my purpose, which of these things should I do? And then you go home, you quit at a decent hour. Not that you can't put in long hours. Sometimes you need to do that. That's what winners do, but you don't do that every day. And you go home and you be with your family, and you put your head on that pillow. And like you said, faith. When you were quoting Genesis 1, you also just kind of reminded me of John 1 and 14,
yes.
Right? Because, it's such a beautiful story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But then in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And nothing that has been made was everything that's been made was made through the Word. And then the killer comes in verse 14. Oh, and by the way, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only.
Amen.
Right. And then you go. I mean, that is a miracle. Talk about revelation. That is like a miracle in and of itself. And if we stay grounded to the simple things of the gospel, it does tell us that God doesn't ask us to do more than we can do, but he does want us to put thoughtfulness in it, because we were made in his image. And so we too can participate in the creating process. We can have the first creation, which is the ideas that form in our mind. And to your point, and I wrote it down, what do I have to know, which will teach me what I need to do? And as I do those things, as I stick with that plan, I become. Yeah. And that is a beautiful thing for our listeners. Let me just ask you, what do you need to know? What do you need to know? And are you planting yourselves in the right place where you might acquire that knowledge? Because if you do acquire that knowledge, it will guide you into what you need to do or what you need to stop doing. and then you will become that person that you need to be to accomplish that purpose, that you have.
Well, there's not a 2-minute answer to what you need to know, but what I outlined, that's the way the book is organized, what you need to know, do, and be. Oh, great. And some of the things that undergirded the no for me, I'll just highlight a few of them, is number one, that chaos is not our enemy. And here's the biblical. I'll elaborate on this one point. I won't be able to elaborate on all the rest of them. But in Genesis 1, it says we're creating God's image. And at the point it says that, it begs the question, well, what do we know about God? It says we're like him. Well, what do we know about him? Well, you go back to Genesis 1, and he created everything. And I'll ask people, what did he create first? And they say, wasn't it light or something? I said, no, what he created first was chaos.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? And we're made like him. So if he created chaos, it's not bad. It's not evil.
Yeah.
He created it. And
that is an amazing insight. I have never heard that before.
I agree with you. It was God-given. I believe that.
It was, it's clearly inferred and logically reversed engineered to where if he is the only sovereign one, then you can literally make it a statement that he created chaos.
And then he modeled for us what he wants us to be like. The following 6 days, he gradually brought more and more order to that chaos. And this tells us what we're created for. In your earlier podcast, I think it was one just before this one, you talk about we're all created to win or made to win. Yep. And let's step back here. What do you need to know to be a leader, to live? This is one of the most fundamental truths is I'm an engineer and God designed us to overcome. He built us. And it says overcome the bird, the sea, the land, and the birds of the air. And nobody is ever fulfilled or happy unless they're winning at something. And as a leader, you need to understand that. If you really get that your job is to make winners out of the people in your group, then it enlightens you. And the guys that are acting like idiots and are troublemakers and all that, underneath, it's because they don't think they're winning. They may not even realizing why, but they're frustrated with not winning. And everybody, like my grandmother, she loved making Thanksgiving feast. That's a form of dominion. She goes to the cupboard, pulls all this stuff out, creates all this chaos, and out comes this feast. And that is winning. And so that's part of, you can tell I'm animated about this. That's
awesome. I think about this recent Christian chorus that's come out, and again, I'll butcher exactly how it comes out, but it's interpreting the whole, Genesis idea. But there's a phrase that says, that God turns the wilderness into gardens.
Amen.
And that's taking chaos. That's what we do. We look at the world. We go, what's broken about the world, and we can protest it, or we can do something about it, right? And it does usually start with a protest. We go, oh, that's wrong. That's chaotic. That's stupid. That makes no sense. And then once I saw software on your LinkedIn thing, I go, okay, this guy's an engineer, and sure enough,
that's the way I think. But
I love it.
Let's make the connection between what you know and what you do. So you're in this meeting, and there's a person that is just a pain in your rear all the time. Nobody can get along with them, and their attitude is glass is half empty, and they're just nothing. You can't talk to them, and it's a total train wreck. If you as a leader can step back and not get emotional about reacting to that person, and step back and say, wait a minute, do I believe this person was created in the image of God? Yes or no? Do I believe this person wants to win deep down or needs to win? Yes or no? Then you start to frame your interaction with that person differently. Instead of adding to the problem by blowing up at them, you start to step back and say, how can I help this person win? How can I understand what winning means for them, or redefine what winning means? Because a lot of people are frustrated. You ever wake up in the morning and you don't feel well and you're grumpy, but you don't know why?
Yeah, that happened today. I'm just kidding. But yeah, that happens.
So that's the way these people are that are such a pain in the rear. There's something wrong inside, and they don't probably even know what it is.
Right.
And as a leader, if you shift from this job of command and control and trying to force them to be what they want, and more being to love and say, how do I get to know them? How do I ask the right questions for them to self-discover what winning means for them? How do I help them get there? Now you're doing God's work. You're bringing order out of chaos.
Yeah, and then you're able to do what we need to do, which is to speak into people's lives. But we can't really speak into people's lives. I mean, we can speak robotically. We can have our memorized lines, but it won't be as effective without doing what you said first, to really go through your theology, to think through it. really want to encourage the business leaders to hear this. This is a great conversation. You have theology. You may not know it or not.
That's absolutely
right.
We all believe something. We all operate out of some set of beliefs.
Yeah. And so when's the last time you've examined those beliefs? When's the last time you have girded them up or deconstructed them, or, whatever it is that you need to do? Because what you need to be careful with is that you evangelize what you believe in the lives of others. And it would be awfully sad if you are actually venting things that you really don't believe, but because of out of frustration or your flesh,
reaction.
Or your reaction, all of those things. But speaking into people's lives is one of the greatest honors that we have, one to another. It's not even a leadership thing. It's a community thing.
It is.
But if anyone can hold on to that and make a difference with that is wonderful. Talk to me about the become part a little bit. How do you land that plane? I can follow your outline really easily, and I know this dumps out into the become, but how do you land that plane in your book?
Well, I'll draw a kind of a physical world parallel to the kind of the way our brain works, and then from that analogy, answer your question. You think through when you first drove a car, when you're, 16, 15, and how overwhelming it was. You got somebody sitting there, and you got all these laws to think about, and you got to step on the accelerator and brake and turn signal, and turn the wheels. And I mean, it's an overwhelming amount of stimuli. And the way our brain works is there's a conscious part and there's a subconscious part. And when we do things over and over, they gradually can move into the subconscious part. Well, when it comes to human interaction, we have a lot of things that are like driving that car. If somebody says something to me, my natural quick instincts, without retraining them, is to strike back. Somebody says something that is offensive to me, then I try to say something. I quickly react and say something offensive back. Well, the retraining, the being part, is that we've operated in the truth so long and practiced the truth so long that our instincts change, our reactions change. And instead of reacting, and I'm 70, I'm a seventh decade. I'm finally getting to the point when somebody says something, I can step back and think of a bigger picture while they're saying it and say, okay, now what was really behind them saying that, instead of me just getting upset with them. I don't say I do this all the time, but you can, after a period of time, walking in God's word long enough and applying principles long enough and apologizing enough, you get to the point your reactions are better.
Well, I've seen you do that just on this podcast. Not that we've necessarily have had a disagreement, but I saw you even in your posture. Sometimes sit back, take it in, and then. And if you can't do that in normal conversation, you're probably not going to be able to do it in a moment of testing. Let me ask you. Okay, so you got me on a track here. So if I do things, and I think your analogy of driving a car, especially if it's a manual transmission, because you just took me back to Lake Arrowhead, California, among the pine trees where I lived, and my dad couldn't handle it, so my mom took over and taught me how to do it.
Yes.
But there was so much going on, right, at the same time. Today, though I don't own a manual transmission, I could pop into anyone, and I don't even have to think about it. I literally don't have to think about it. I think the only time it would be bothersome for me is if I was in Los Angeles traffic and having to keep downshifting or whatever that. But even that, it just becomes a subconscious, feature. Maybe I don't know in computer language if the subconscious would be relative to the hard drive or
we call them background
RAM.
Processes.
Okay.
Background processes.
They're
running back there, and you pay no attention to them.
But okay, so I'm going to throw you a curveball, Gary.
Yeah, sure.
So so we know that becoming happens when I consciously practice a certain something long enough towards it gets embedded in my subconscious. Now, I've also probably have done that in areas that are not healthy.
That's
So
right.
now I've got programming that's in my subconscious. How do I regenerate that? How do I get rid of that? How do I bring the subconscious into the conscious and then
Well,
have an opportunity to retool?
that's where I think the Bible is unusual in some of its prescriptions. Bible basically says there's some genetic things wrong with us. Genetic meaning we're born that way.
Mm-hmm.
And my verse for the year, somebody told me years ago to pick a verse for the year and pray it every day.
Wow.
And my verse for the year is from Romans 12:2, which is, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. What you're describing is a transformation of going from a habitual state that is wrong to a habitual state that is right. And a believer, a person of faith would realize that we need God's Spirit to help us do that. And, he says, surround yourself with people that will speak truth to you. So if you're in a bad habit, my wife will tell me. And
yeah, they're really good at that.
Yeah. And so, having people around you that love you enough to say things that are not comfortable, that's one. Being in the Word, Jesus says, my words are spirit.
Yeah.
And so just reading the Bible is not like reading any other book. It is feeding us. It's changing
alive.
us. It's alive. That's what it says, sharper than any. Yeah. So those are, they sound like mystical answers, but they're true.
Yeah, and let's throw this out to our readers too. If you're part of a religious practice that doesn't get you into the Word, or you're not part of any of that, encourage you to get a Bible, and just off the cuff here. Maybe order one from Amazon that's in the New Living Translation. One of my ex-professors was actually part of that committee, and I know him to be an expert in Greek, and I know that team put a lot of hard work into that. I would suggest maybe the New Living Translation is a good place to start. You can always change later. If the stuff that Gary and I are talking about, is just like way out there, then I would probably start in the book of John, maybe.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for those of you who are faith-based, but maybe you're not in the Word and you want to get going and you're driven and you're stressing out and all of that, maybe start in the book of Proverbs, but read the chapter of Proverbs that corresponds to the day of the calendar, the day of the month. So, what's today? The 12th? No, today's the 11th.
So read the 11th chapter.
Yeah, read the 11th chapter of Proverbs and do that for a few cycles. And then I think it'll whet your appetite, because it's a lot of stuff in there is abstract. And if you're a business person, you're probably an abstract thinker. And so you'll be able to connect, maybe some applications to that. But I think you'll be thirsty to read more. And wouldn't you say, Gary? Yeah.
Amen to that. I totally agree.
It's a good stuff. And neither Gary nor I are saying we've arrived, but we're saying, man, if you want to find some help like we found it, here's a great place to start. Gary, so we know that we can get Built to Beat Chaos, your book, on Amazon. But what if somebody wants to learn more about what you're doing in your, I guess, is it a, would you call it a consulting practice? Is it a software?
We call it mentoring. It's a mentoring platform. And the way we say is Lead First is a faith-driven leadership platform. And what it does is integrate faith and whole business health or care and whole person care into one training and a mentoring program. It's an ongoing program, kind of like a fitness program. And to get a hold of us, people sometimes think I don't mean this. I do mean it. I'm not doing anything else in our business but just talking to people. So when you go to our website and say, I'd like to have a conversation, you'll be talking to me probably, because I'm at the stage of life where I want to share what I've learned, and I also love learning from you. But my focus is on the integration of business and faith. How can we be more effective in the business world? Just a couple of statistics. 150 million people go to work 8 hours a day. How many people go to church, and for how long in a week? And so if we're going to be salt and light and live according to God's calling, where is there the greater opportunity? It's not, quote, in going to church. We obviously need to go to church. We're commanded to go to church. But we live in the work world. And that's set my heart on fire to work with people that they want to do a little more of this. They want to figure out how to do it better. That's what we're here for. And I'll talk to anybody anytime about it, whether we can help them or not. I'll tell them. But
yeah, is there a bullseye target audience that this software is designed for?
I would say businesses that are probably above, say, 25 employees, because they are starting to realize as a leader they have to change the way they run things. They've got to have another layer of management. And I lived there. I started a business with a couple of friends, as I told you, and it went from one employee, me, to over 500. And I was consumed with that growth. And so 25 and over is somebody we're looking for. The business is probably growing, or they plan on it growing. And they're going to need help in getting from 25 to 50 to 100 to 200 people in just the process management. And they don't want to compromise on trying to bring biblical principles in the way they run the business, the culture they're building, and assure that people are cared for. And I was talking to an organization recently that the owner of this, or the leader of this business, took over 30 years ago with this same idea. And today they're having 600 salvations a year in their company.
That kind of reminds me of Anderson Trucking I was telling you about before. They would have summer picnics, and we realize that not every corporation leader who's listening to this has the elbow room to do some of these things, but you shouldn't shut it off completely. You should. No. One of the things I was thinking is, I wonder if that could be a tool for a vice president in a large organization, and he or she would use it just in their own, their own approach, their own. Well,
I'm glad you kind of prompted me. We have larger divisions, like you're saying. So it's any place where someone has enough influence to control the culture, and they've got enough complexity in the way the operation runs that they want help dealing with the complexity of the operation and the people caring side. And there's really no size limit to what we can do, but we think of ourselves as small, mid-size.
Yeah, we'll put this in the show notes. But how would we get a hold of you? Would they go to your website?
Just go to the website, sure. And on there's a place that says set up an appointment. My email is Gary Harpst at leadfirst.ai, or go to the website and you just ask for a meeting and you'll get connected to me probably.
And and the website's leadfirst.ai.
.ai. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's right.
Great. We'll make sure we get that in the show notes. Just so everybody knows, this is the first time we've met, and I have enjoyed this conversation so much that I want to say, hey, how about we do this? Can we do this again in the near future? I think we've just kind of scratched the surface on things that we can talk about. We didn't really talk about all the hashtags here that you have on your profile. I would love to do that. I would really like to see where this goes. Love the structure of the book. What do I need to know so that I could do it? And then how does that doing, transform my becoming? who I am becoming, turning wilderness into gardens, right? It's just
I love that phrase. Yes.
yeah. Well, I stole it from a lyric of a song. Gary Harpst, thank you so much, and let's do this again real soon.
Well, thanks, Jim. By the way, you're bringing order out of chaos too, just by speaking truth into the world. So thank you.
Well, I'm trying, but I do love what I do. If you're not part of the Lead Today community, let me invite you. Go to leadtodaycommunity.com. That's leadtodaycommunity.com and sign up for Monday Moments. It's a weekly email that will encourage your leadership. Again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for telling a friend about the Today Counts show.